Many people don't realize that they know this game, and many more only seem to think of it as either a knockoff or extension of Tetris. So, to put it bluntly, this game is not derivative of Tetris, and while it is Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, it's not a copy of it. In reality, Mean Bean and Kirby's Avalanche are both reskins of Puyo Puyo. Puyo Puyo is its own game, and an amazing one, once you pass the initial mountain of a challenge that is starting. And that is why I am here. I'm Napoleon, and I've been playing Puyo for about 6 years. Today, I will teach you how to start playing Puyo, so that you may learn to love this game as much as I have. Okay, before we begin, 2 disclaimers. Some advice in this video may be simplified. This video is made so that new players can understand it. And a warning to those new players, this game is deceivingly hard. I've seen a few times people thinking Puyo is like easier or slower Tetris, which is weird given that genre is the only thing they really have in common. But at most skill levels, you'll see that Puyo is much harder than Tetris is. Lastly, the first 2 chapters of this video, Basics of Puyo and Common Terms, are aimed towards new players. If you understand how to play Puyo, feel free to skip to Basics of Chaining. The basics of Puyo can be difficult to grasp. It took me a while before I could understand what I was doing, and it may not make sense to you for a bit of time. If you don't understand by the end of this chapter, don't worry. I'll talk more in depth about it after covering the common terms. To start, you have a puzzle board and pieces made of 1 or 2 colors called Puyo. If you place 4 Puyo of the same color next to each other, they will disappear and everything above it will fall. When a group of Puyo disappear, if another 4 Puyo combine, then those 4 will also disappear, creating what's called a chain. If any Puyo touches this X at the top of the screen, you lose. This is called a top-out. Quick note, for those with color blindness, most Puyo games give you the ability to change the appearance of Puyo, with some specifically made to be colorblind friendly. Additionally to that, Puyo Puyo Champions and Puyo Puyo Tetris 2 both have color filters available. Basically, it's a gravity-based puzzle game where you want to create as high as a chain as you can. It might seem a bit confusing at first, but it's quite simple once it clicks. But before we get more in depth about chains, we'll need to go over the commonly used terms, because I'm already tired of writing a way that doesn't use them. I've already mentioned some of the common terms: board, piece, and Puyo. To quickly reiterate them, the board is where the game is played, and piece or Puyo are what you control and place on the board. There's also a few other terms to know, which will be quick to cover. Link refers to matching color Puyo placed next to each other. Pop and clear are interchangeable terms that refer to when 4 matching Puyo are linked together and disappear. Chains, which I briefly mentioned earlier, are the main focus of the game, and your main goal is to create as high a chain as possible. So, that's what's important for now. And with that covered, let's get into the fun stuff. As I mentioned in the last chapter, chaining is the main focus of the game, and it can be quite hard to understand when you're starting out. And it's something that can't be taught. The basics of chaining fall mostly in pattern recognition, something that's learned through trial. But that doesn't mean I can't teach you anything. To help with making your chains, we use chaining patterns, which are repeating patterns used to make the chain cleaner. Here's an easy one: stairs, made by stacking 3 Puyo straight up and having another matching Puyo in the column next to it, above a different set of Puyo. Another good one is sandwich, made with this general shape. As my statement, quote, "this general shape" might imply, Sandwich is a very versatile pattern that can be made in a number of ways. I'd recommend not trying too hard to use patterns until you understand chaining mechanics, but once you do, it's very useful to help keep your board clean, which makes bigger chains easier because of the lack of wasted Puyo. And big chains are important. Something I've yet to mention is Puyo's main gameplay. While I have said that chains are the focus of the game, I haven't said that Puyo Puyo is a primarily competitive game, as in typically you play against an opponent, and this changes quite a bit. A normal Puyo match works like this. By making chains and clearing Puyo, you will send garbage to your opponent. Any garbage sent will be placed in reserve until two things. First, the attacker's chain must end. So, if someone sends a 6 chain, garbage from the 1 to 5 chains will not fall until the 6th chain link pops. After the attacker's chain finishes, the next time the defender places a Puyo, if they pop anything or not, the garbage will fall from the top of the board. Any garbage that drops will take up board space as a nuisance Puyo. It can only be cleared by a colored Puyo popping next to it. However, if the defending side does use their own chain, they will first attack the garbage in their reserve, offsetting it. If the defender's chain is higher than the attacker's, then they will counterattack and send whatever excess garbage they deal back. And to make sure that high chains are more powerful than lower ones, every chain link will send an increasing amount of garbage. For example, if a 6 chain sends 30 garbage Puyo, the following 7 could send 40 garbage Puyo, which will stack on top of any garbage that is in the opponent's reserve. So, something like 2 combined 4 chains will be much weaker than a single 8 chain. Another important thing is that damage will increase exponentially up to 5 chain, then increase linearly from there. This exponential growth at the start makes it so that 5 chains will beat basically anything below it, and additionally to that, 5 chains send enough total garbage to guarantee a top out if it is an offset, making them very dangerous. But even with these mechanics, it doesn't mean that having a bigger chain will always guarantee a win. A smaller chain can beat a larger one, with the use of power chains. Well, that's quite a bit of information to take in, especially if you're new. So let's slow down and take a breather, yeah? I'd like to quickly talk about this channel. I started making videos at around the end of March, started trying out these longer, more edited videos to experiment, and I quite enjoy making them. I'd like to definitely make more like this, so I'd like to ask for your support. Liking the video or commenting helps the video reach further in the algorithm, and subscribing helps push the channel as a whole. It also means you'll find any new videos of mine much easier without having to wait for the algorithm to show you them. So, if you're interested in more like this, I'd appreciate any support or feedback you're willing to give. It really does help a lot more than you would think. Thank you, and let's continue. So even now, there's mechanics I haven't covered yet. First we'll talk about is power chains. You see, up to now we've gone off the assumption that chains always deal the same amount of damage, but this isn't true. The amount of garbage a chain sends is based not only on chain size, but Puyo popped. So, you can deal slightly more damage by making larger links of Puyo, or deal a lot more damage by popping multiple links of Puyo. In fact, it only takes popping 2 links at the end of a chain to make it so that it can beat another one that's higher than it, which can decide the round at higher chain lengths. Power chains are pretty common at high level play, as they can be made and sent faster than a normal chain, while still being more powerful than them. But power chains can also be used for evil. This is a chaining pattern called Hellfire, and it's cheese. Basically, starting the round with either a 2 or 3 linked 2 or 3 chain will cause a good amount of damage, especially if the opponent doesn't fight back with anything, giving you a massive space advantage. But this is a gimmick, and a Returnal 5 chain will doom you. To go off on that remark, let's talk about the space advantage it gives. You see, Puyo is a snowballing game, as in, if someone falls into a disadvantage, it will usually be quite hard to pull themselves back to neutral ground. So, getting even a slight advantage could win a round. There are a few types of advantage. I've already mentioned space. Puyo is played on a 12x6 board, meaning it only has 72 spaces, and because each link requires 4 Puyo, you've not got much space to spare. So, even a few nuisance Puyo will limit the power of your chain, and against an opponent who isn't facing the same problem, could cause your loss. Another important advantage is chain. Being far behind in chain length means that if your opponent sets off their chain, then you have to make yours overpower theirs before it ends, putting you on a timer if it's possible for you to match them. And Puyo, or Peace Advantage, is the last one. This is when one player has a lot more Puyo on the board than their opponent. Puyo being the only resource means being behind creates a massive struggle. But at high level play, no one plays slowly and this rarely shows up. Or it wouldn't, except for one very common situation. Because garbage doesn't fall until the attacker's chain finishes, the defender has the ability to place more Puyo, and therefore get a peace advantage. If it takes 10 seconds to pop a full chain, that's 10 seconds of placing Puyo for the defender, which can give a large advantage to them, allowing them to extend their chain by 2 or more to help overpower their opponent. You may have realized at this point just how strong getting an advantage really is. So, you may wonder how you can try to force an advantage in your favor. Remember how I said that even a few nuisance Puyo could be what decides a round? And that you get an advantage if your opponent sends their chain first? Well, there's something that allows you to push for both of these advantages at the same time. Harassments are chains made alongside your main chain. They are much smaller, typically ranging from 2 to 4, and rarely 5 or 6. They are used to try and give an advantage to one player, either by wasting their enemy's board space with garbage, forcing them to set off their chain, or the actual last advantage I haven't mentioned, trigger block. You see, the trigger is the first link of Puyo that are popped to start a chain. Now, if that trigger isn't accessible, then the main chain can't be sent. If that is the case, then they can be pushed back further because they don't have the ability to set off their chain against further harassments. And if the trigger is blocked by enough garbage, they may not have the time to dig out their chain and extend it to be strong enough to beat out their opponents. Meaning this is the best advantage in the game. This means harassments are very powerful, as if a harassment hits, it will always give at least a small advantage, if not outright decide the game. And it doesn't even end there, because there's something called margin time. When a round lasts 96 seconds, all garbage sent receives a multiplier. And after the first increase, it starts to increase again every 16 seconds. And while this does apply to normal chains, it helps harassments much more because they're disruptive. So, harassments are a large part of competitive Puyo, and use of them can be the deciding factor of the game. So, how do we make them? The simplest form of a harassment chain is this, just built on top of your main chain. These aren't great. Because you want your main chain to be as large as possible, using Puyo on these side chains could potentially waste them if the harassment isn't fired off. Instead, it's smarter to quickly make harassments out of a part of the main chain, so that it's possible to just send the full chain if you have to. Furthermore, it's best to create harassments out of the first few links of the main chain, because the trigger is usually the easiest place to extend the chain. This is a lot easier said than done, and mostly learned through experience again. But also when you use harassments may differ. For instance, if you're better at chaining than your opponent, and they don't use harassments, then playing passive could be in your best interest. But against an opponent who's better than you at chaining, then well-placed harassments may be your only hope to win. And a big reason for being careful with harassments is that they take both time and resources. And if your opponent sets off their main chain at the same time you set off a harassment, you can lose a lot of time and Puyo that could have been used to extend your own chain. So then, knowing when your opponent can set off their chain can be a major help with sending harassments. And with how strong harassments are, knowing if your opponent is either sending a 3-chain harassment or a full 12 chain is very important. And that's where we use Puyo's hardest skill. When it comes to discussing observation, saying easier said than done is an understatement is itself an understatement. Observation is about the easiest skill to talk about, but the hardest to actually do. Observation is when you observe your enemy's board and see what they have in play. This means not only the Puyo on their board, but what they have upcoming too. It also means seeing their main chain, getting an approximation of its size, and seeing if they have a harassment or have anything to block your harassments. And you have to do so while playing yourself. I'm sure that first remark about observation is becoming real clear now. I'd also advise watching extra carefully during the beginning of a round in case your opponent attempts a hellfire, as blocking your trigger will almost always cause it to hit you. And that's really it when it comes to observation. As I said, it's easy to talk about. The difficulty is all in actually doing it. Alright, last chapter. First off, the overview and abridged version. To be good at Puyo, create a large main chain. This will be the backbone of your gameplay. Use chaining patterns to keep your chain clean, which helps make it easier to make the chain larger. While making that chain, make smaller chains for the purpose of disrupting your opponent. And watch your opponent's board to know their main chain's length and if they are preparing any harassments. To that, don't try to learn all of this at once. In fact, the order that overview is in is the order that you should learn these skills. Next is practicing. The best practice will always be someone around your skill level. But another important thing to note is that Puyo has a CPU player available. The CPU is a fine opponent early on, but once you reach a certain point, about where you can quickly make 9 chains or higher, it stops being good practice. And once you start trying to learn observation and harassments, it starts becoming detrimental because the simplistic way it plays, combined with the ways it has to cheat to work, either make it too easy or unfairly punish you in ways a real player wouldn't. As I said in my Tetris guide, something very important to know is that your improvement will not be linear. Sometimes you will perform better or worse than usual, and this is normal. Don't sweat too hard about playing worse than you usually do, and don't be afraid to take a break if you're getting frustrated. And lastly, I'd like to give a special thanks to Puyo Nexus. They have their own guide to starting Puyo, which mentions some things I didn't think a new player had to know. Additionally, I use their wiki to remind myself of some of the terms and specifics of some mechanics. And most importantly, all of the Draco art I use I ripped from their gallery. There is a link to their website in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you learned something new.